With Tom Brady having just retired and Patrick Mahomes winning another MVP and Super Bowl, all-time quarterback rankings have been a major point of contention for everybody as of late. So I'm deciding to share my top 10 quarterbacks of all time with y'all in this video. There isn't necessarily a set criteria for this list, but I consider longevity and consistency, statistical production, playoff performance, awards and accolades, peak performance, and winning as the crucial factors behind the list. Before I continue though, make sure to subscribe to my channel for more NFL content, as well as like this video if you enjoy. You know the drill. Before I start, I'd just like to share the quarterbacks that just missed out on my top 10. Rodgers Staubach. Staubach was the Steve Young of the 70s, pioneering the scrambling quarterback while posting excellent efficiency stats, leading the league in passer rating and adjusted net yards per attempt 4 times. He made 6 Pro Bowls, the 1970s All-Decade Team, and won a staggering 74.6% of his career games. He never won an MVP, but probably should have won at least 3 in 1971, 1973, and 79. He also won 2 Super Bowls, Super Bowl MVP and Super Bowl VI, and had an 11-6 playoff record. What hurts Staubach is twofold. He didn't play very long, only 8 full seasons, and his overall playoff stats are mediocre and nowhere near his regular season dominance. Terry Bradshaw. Bradshaw had some excellent seasons in the late 70s and early 80s that punctuated the Steelers' dynasty. He led the NFL in touchdowns and yards per attempt twice, as well as winning league MVP in 1978 and making the 1970s All-Decade Team. He was also an excellent playoff quarterback, going 14-5 in the playoffs and winning 4 Super Bowls along with 2 Super Bowl MVPs, seeing significant uptick statistically in the postseason. However, Bradshaw played in a pre-salary cap era where he consistently had the best defenses and coach, and combine that with his relatively unimpressive overall physical talent and regular season statistics, and he just misses my list. Patrick Mahomes. Let's be honest, the only thing holding Mahomes off this list is longevity. He's easily one of the 3 best quarterbacks I've ever watched and has had the greatest start to a career ever. 2 Super Bowls, 2 league MVPs, 2 Super Bowl MVPs, 3 Super Bowl appearances, 5 home conference championship games, 5 Pro Bowls, a win rate just south of 80%, has led the league in yards once and touchdowns twice, and ranks first in essentially every meaningful efficiency metric in both the regular season and postseason, all of this in just 5 years. Mahomes also passes the eye test with flying colors, as he is the most talented quarterback I've ever seen, having the ability to make throws from anywhere on the field look routine in any situation. He may just fall short of the list now, but in 5 years from now, I'd be stunned if he doesn't find himself in at least the top 5. Number 10, Steve Young. Steve Young at his peak was truly another level of dominant. His raw stats are phenomenal, and his era-adjusted efficiency stats make him look like the greatest quarterback of all time, leading the league in completion percentage 5 times, touchdowns 4 times, passer rating 6 times, and adjusted net yards per attempt 4 times. Young won 74.1% of his games from 1991 to 1998, won 2 MVPs, made 3 first-team All-Pros, and 8 Pro Bowls. Oh, and he also quarterbacked one of the greatest NFL teams ever in 1994 to the Super Bowl, having one of the greatest playoff runs and Super Bowl performances ever en route to winning his only Super Bowl, winning Super Bowl MVP behind his 6 touchdown passes. He's considered one of the greatest scrambling quarterbacks ever, as well only adding to his legend. What holds Young back from being higher on this list is his longevity. Young only played about 9 seasons of football, and while he was dominant within that time, it's still a really short period of time for one of the greatest quarterbacks ever. He was handed as nice of a card as you can get with the 49ers, taking over a stacked roster in a dynasty, experiencing the talents of both Jerry Rice and then later Terrell Owens at receiver, as well as elite defensive support, and while calling him a system quarterback off the basis of his lone Tampa season is iffy at best, it certainly doesn't help his legacy. The other knock on Young is his postseason play, as while the Niners led the NFL in win percentage from 1991 to 1998, they only appeared in 1 Super Bowl in that time, and Young's play was certainly a part of that, as he took way too many sacks and was just overall far too inconsistent in the playoffs outside of 1994. You can't help but wonder if Young had been as consistent in the playoffs as his predecessor was, the 49ers could have won another ring or two in the 90s. Number 9, Brett Favre. Remember, this is based strictly on playing career, and for as bad of a person as Favre is, he had a great NFL career. Favre played every possible game from 1993 to 2009, an Iron Man streak that will likely never be matched due to sheer probability. Favre led the NFL in yards twice and touchdowns 4 times. He won 3 straight MVPs from 1995 to 1997, made 11 Pro Bowls, made the 90s All-Decade Team, won a Super Bowl, made 2, and retired as the all-time leader in yards and touchdowns. He had one of the strongest arms in NFL history, which ended up as a blessing and a curse, as Favre could make every throw but tried to far too often, leading to far more interceptions than other all-time greats. For a moment in late January 1998, it looked as though Favre would rival Joe Montana for GOAT status, as he had an excellent playoff statistical resume and a stellar 9-3 playoff record ahead of Super Bowl 32. But Favre's Packers fell as heavy favorites in that game, and Favre ended his career losing 7 of his last 11 playoff games following that, posting a mediocre 19 touchdowns to 19 interceptions and having several playoff flameouts. Favre had an extremely high peak, but his inconsistency on a season-to-season basis relative to other greats, as well as a somewhat underwhelming second act, prevented him from ranking any higher. Number 8, Drew Brees. Even though Favre has more accomplishments than Brees, I think Brees was the greater quarterback. Unlike Favre, Brees was the model of consistency for quarterback play in the league for 15 years, as in every season from 2004 to 2019, he was a top 10 quarterback with several top 5 seasons sprinkled in throughout. Brees has a statistical profile matched by very few, leading the NFL in completion percentage 6 times, yards 7 times, touchdowns 4 times, and rating twice. He retired as the all-time leader in passing yards and finished second in touchdowns. He made 13 Pro Bowls, won a Super Bowl and a Super Bowl MVP, and finished as a runner-up for MVP 4 times, never winning it. Brees was never the consensus best quarterback in the league, the way his peers Peyton, Brady, and Rodgers all were at one point or another. His arm was never special, and he often struggled outside in the cold, as well as benefiting from playing from one of the best offensive schemers of this century in Sean Payton for almost 15 years. But he's also maybe the most unlucky quarterback on this list. For starters, his best seasons came in 2009, 2011, and 2018, but each of those times he was beaten out for MVP by a quarterback who either had an even more historic season, 2011 Aaron Rodgers to 2018 Patrick Mahomes, or led their team to a nearly unprecedented start record-wise, 2009 Peyton. Brees also didn't make the playoffs nearly as much as other all-time greats due to dealing with some of the worst defenses in NFL history during the latter half of his physical prime, 2012 and 2014 through 2016. Brees was a very good playoff performer, ranking near the top in almost all playoff passing metrics and having a dominant Super Bowl run in 2009, but other than that year, he was almost always undone by the events of his teammates. His kicker lost it for him in 2004, his defense lost him the game in 2010, 2011, 2017, and 2019, and a phantom no PI call lost him the 2018 NFC Championship game, Brees' best shot at a second ring. It wasn't until 2020 against Tampa Bay, his final game, that he had a truly awful playoff game and lost it for his team, and even that game probably goes differently if Jared Cook doesn't fumble as the Saints were driving in the third quarter up 20-13. Brees didn't do quite enough to rank higher, but his consistency and production landed him at 8. Number 7, John Elway. Elway was the most difficult quarterback to rank on this list. His supporters claim he's at worst a top 3 quarterback of all time due to his physical talent and clutch moments, while his critics claim he's overrated due to his very mediocre statistics. The truth, as in most cases, lies somewhere in between. Elway was one of the most talented quarterbacks of all time, blessed with one of the strongest arms in NFL history that allowed him to make any throw imaginable, but that didn't make him overly productive. Elway led the league in passing yards just once and never led the league in touchdowns. He had a career passer rating under 80, and even adjusting for era, he didn't begin producing at an even near elite level consistently until 1993. He did make 9 Pro Bowls, win the 1987 MVP, make the 90s All-Decade Team, and go to 5 Super Bowls, but in his first 3 he was blown out, and in his final 2 he was largely a complimentary piece to Terrell Davis on teams that cheated the salary cap. With all of that being said, Elway was excellent in the conference championship games against Cleveland in 1987 and 1989 to get the Super Bowls, and elevated multiple teams without Super Bowl level talent to those heights. His statistics are also weakened by the fact that he spent the first 10 years of his career stuck in Dan Reeves' outdated system and only played with one truly elite weapon in his entire career, Shannon Sharpe. Had Elway had stronger weapons throughout his career like Montana, Young, Peyton, etc., and/or played in an offensive system like the 49ers or Chargers at the time, and there's little doubt his statistics would have been better than they were. His statistics make it harder for me to rank him higher than 7, but he checks nearly every other box, which lands him here. Number 6, Dan Marino. Marino and Elway played in the same era, and Elway won more rings, so why do I have Marino higher? For starters, Marino was significantly better statistically than Elway was on a consistent basis. From 1983 to 1987, Marino was the best quarterback in football, putting up near Wilt Chamberlain-like numbers compared to the rest of the players at the position. He did this with an extremely fun and arrogant style of play, having a great arm and the quickest release I've ever seen, which made him the best quarterback at preventing sacks in NFL history other than Peyton Manning. It's mysterious that he regressed in 1988 and never returned to the level he was at during the first 5 years of his career, but Marino still led the league in yards 5 times, touchdowns 3 times, and rating in 1984. He made 9 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros, and won the 1984 MVP, a season in which he had arguably the greatest season ever. He retired as the all-time leader in both passing yards and passing touchdowns. He won over 60% of his career games and made the playoffs 9 times, yet he retired without ever winning a Super Bowl, the biggest knock on Marino's career. Marino, of course, is not fully responsible for this, as he faced more complete teams in the playoffs several times while getting unlucky in close games a few other times, but his statistics severely dropped in the postseason, and his offenses consistently started slow and got themselves into big holes. To me, for as great as Marino was, if you were truly a top 5 quarterback of all time, he'd have won at least 1 Super Bowl, as every quarterback in my top 5 has. Number 5, Aaron Rodgers. Rodgers and Marino are similar in many ways. Both made their only Super Bowl early in their career. Both had historic seasons early in their career. Both were regarded as the best passer the position had ever seen. Both had historically dominant stretches of play. Both didn't win as much as you'd expect. The difference is that Rodgers won his only Super Bowl while Marino lost his, and Rodgers had a second stretch of elite play, whereas Marino never recaptured his form from his first 5 years. Before Patrick Mahomes, Rodgers was considered the most talented player to ever play the position. He had God-given arm talent with pinpoint accuracy that allowed him to make off-platform throws look easy, even downfield. Rodgers boasts the greatest career touchdown to interception ratio ever by a margin, and his statistical resume doesn't end there, as he led the league in completion percentage once, touchdowns twice, and passer rating 4 times, along with ranking 9th in career passing yards and 5th in career passing touchdowns. He's made 10 Pro Bowls, 4 first-team All-Pros, made the 2010s All-Decade Team, won 4 MVPs, and a Super Bowl with a Super Bowl MVP. That's the conundrum with Rodgers' career. Despite all of the talent he has and the statistical profile he's accumulated, he's only made 1 Super Bowl and has a mediocre 11-10 playoff record. A lot of that isn't on him, as his defenses and special teams have let him down on numerous occasions, but Rodgers consistently struggles in the fourth quarter and at conducting comebacks, and this often rears its ugly head in the playoffs. Rodgers will be a slam dunk first ballot Hall of Famer by the time he retires, but one has to wonder how history will remember him having only 1 ring and his most talented quarterback ever title being stripped by Mahomes. Number 4, Johnny Unitas. My quarterback Mount Rushmore begins with one of the pioneers of the quarterback position, Johnny Unitas. Some group Unitas in with other all-time great pre-Super Bowl era quarterbacks like Sammy Baugh, Otto Graham, and Y.A. Tittle, but Unitas checks both the longevity and dominance box in a way the other 3 fail to, which is why he's at 4 while the rest fall somewhere around the top 15 for me. 10 Pro Bowls, 5 first-team All-Pros, 3 MVPs, 2 NFL championships, and a Super Bowl, 1960s All-Decade Team, led the league in completion percentage once, yards 4 times, touchdowns 4 times, and passer rating 3 times, and he won 65% of his career games. The only knocks against Unitas' career are 1, a majority of his time took place before the Super Bowl era, and 2, his backup Earl Morrall came in for him in 1968 and won 13-1 while leading the league in touchdowns, making first-team All-Pro, and winning league MVP. Which brings into question if Unitas was really as valuable as some of the other quarterbacks on this list. Personally, I think it was at least somewhat due to Morrall being better than he got credit for, as he put up great numbers a few seasons later in Miami, but it's still a footnote footnote when considering Unitas' career. With that being said, when combining Unitas' impact on the NFL as one of the first true superstars and everything he accomplished, only 3 quarterbacks in NFL history can be called greater. Number 3, Joe Montana. Joe Montana played in an era with no salary cap. He had great defenses, he had the greatest wide receiver of all time, he had the greatest offensive coach of all time, he didn't put up impressive yardage stats, I get all of that. But things go both ways. The rest of the league during Montana's era also had no salary cap. Montana had to face historically great defenses, such as the mid-80s Bears or Lawrence Taylor's Giants in the playoffs on a consistent basis. Montana had won 2 Super Bowl MVPs before Jerry Rice was drafted. Montana won back-to-back MVPs in his first 2 seasons without Bill Walsh. And while Montana didn't put up impressive total yardage stats, he led the league in yards per attempt in 1989 and finished in the top 10 times. He just never got the amount of pass attempts as Dan Marino got because his offense was smarter and more efficient. Montana wasn't a special physical talent, but he had underrated mobility and was as smart as they came, going through progressions and reads quicker than almost anyone I've ever seen, and had a knack for seemingly always finding the open man. 8 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros, 1980s All-Decade Team, 2 league MVPs, 3 Super Bowl MVPs, along with 4 Super Bowls, led the league in completion percentage 4 times, touchdowns 2 times, and passer rating 2 times, won 71.3% of his career games, and has the second most quarterback playoff wins in NFL history. Montana did have great teammates and a phenomenal coach, didn't play as long as my top 2 quarterbacks did, and even missed games in the seasons he did play. But what set Montana apart from essentially everyone else in NFL history was his ability to perform on the biggest stage. His career playoff stats are excellent and hold up even today. His 1989 playoff run is considered the greatest in NFL history. He's the greatest Super Bowl quarterback ever, with 3 Super Bowl MVPs, and the 1 MVP he didn't win was a game in which he threw for 357 yards, 2 touchdowns, averaged nearly 10 yards per attempt, and had a 115.2 passer rating, while orchestrating the game-winning drive. Had it not been for a few controversial calls in the 1983 NFC Championship game versus Washington, and a Roger Craig fumble in the 1990 NFC Championship game versus the Giants, there's a solid chance he has 6 Super Bowl rings. But most of all, Joe Cool had an aura of inevitability around him in clutch time that only Mahomes and another player would later share, and that earns him a top 3 spot on my list. Number 2, Peyton Manning. Tom Brady may have all the records now, but on a per-play basis, Peyton Manning is the greatest regular season quarterback of all time, at least for now, as Patrick Mahomes is coming for that and seemingly everything else. Manning made 14 Pro Bowls, 7 first-team All-Pros, won 5 league MVPs, made the 2000s All-Decade Team, led the league in completion percentage twice, yards 3 times, touchdowns 4 times, and passer rating 3 times. He has the most efficient era-adjusted season of all time, 2004, and the best volume season of all time, breaking the single-season passing yards and touchdowns records in 2013. He retired as the all-time leader in yards and touchdowns. Manning threw a few too many interceptions early in his career, but in a 10-season stretch from 2003 to 2013, he missed all of 2011. He won 78.1% of his games, had the most dominant 10-year statistical stretch of any quarterback ever, and his offense never finished below 4th in points per drive in that time. Peyton never had a cannon, but he might have been the most influential quarterback of all time because of his prowess at the line of scrimmage and usage of audibles, along with being better at making protection and route adjustments than any quarterback ever. He was essentially the best quarterback and offensive coordinator in the league for a decade. He's the only quarterback to break the all-time touchdown record twice, 2004 and 2013, and he prevented sacks more effectively than any quarterback in NFL history. He proved he could play outdoors by going to Denver off neck surgery at 36 years old and being the best quarterback in the NFL in back-to-back seasons, and he was an elite player from essentially late in 1998 to midway through 2014. He was a lock for 12 wins and a top 5 offense during his entire prime, despite some truly awful run games and defenses. But for all of the regular season success, the knock on Peyton will forever be the postseason, as he famously went one and done, losing the first playoff game 9 times and had a mediocre 14-13 career playoff record. And as much as I would love to absolve all blame from him, it'd be disingenuous. Of course, Peyton had plenty of bad playoff luck that made his record look much worse than it should have been. Mike Vanderjagt missing a game-winning field goal in 2000 and game-tying field goal in 2005. Nick Harper not running to the sidelines for a free touchdown in 2005. Having to play in snowy Gillette in back-to-back seasons in 2003 and 2004 instead of Indy because Edgerrin James failed to score from the 1-yard line in back-to-back regular season games against the Patriots. Deflected interceptions and his defense allowing a 78-yard touchdown drive in the fourth quarter to Billy Volek in 2007, Bijan Robinson for getting the snap count on a third down to seal the game in 2008, his special teams and defense blowing a last-minute lead to the Jets in 2010, and of course Raheem Moore forgetting how to cover a deep pass in 2012. But here's the thing, Peyton never had a dominant playoff run. He was dominant in the first 2 games in 2003 before he threw 4 interceptions in New England in the AFC Championship game. The closest he came was in 2009 as he was leading the Colts down the field for a game-tying score in the fourth quarter of Super Bowl 44, but then Tracy Porter happened. He had a chance in 2013, leading the Broncos to the Super Bowl before the entire team forgot how to play football in Super Bowl 48. His 2006 playoff run, though better than his stats suggest, was underwhelming other than the second half of the AFC Championship game, and he was carried to his second Super Bowl in 2015 by the Broncos' all-time great defense. His offense is consistently underachieved come postseason, averaging just 15.6 points per game in their playoff losses. Peyton was an unstoppable machine in the regular season, the LeBron James of quarterbacks, but his playoff career was more akin to Karl Malone, and that, among other things, prevents him from having GOAT status, even if I believe him to be very arguably the best to ever play the position. Number 1, and the greatest quarterback of all time, Tom Brady. Were you actually expecting somebody else? You shouldn't have. Brady has set a nearly impossible bar of unmatched success at the quarterback position in NFL history. He checks every box. 15 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros, 7 Super Bowls, 10 appearances, 14 conference championship games, a win percentage a shade over 75%, 3 league MVPs with 10 top 5 finishes, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, all-decade teams in both the 2000s and 2010s, led the league in completion percentage once, yards 4 times, touchdowns 5 times, and rating twice. He has the all-time records in touchdowns, yards, wins, playoff wins, etc. Some quarterbacks have the titles, but not the individual success, like Aikman or Bradshaw. Some quarterbacks have individual success, but not the titles, like Marino, Rodgers, or Brees. Some quarterbacks had God-given talent, but not enough individual success and/or titles, like Elway or Favre. Montana had the individual success and titles, but not the longevity, overwhelming talent, or dominant peak relative to other quarterbacks. Peyton had everything but a dominant postseason run that ended in a Super Bowl. Brady has everything. Unmatched team success, unmatched longevity, a peak that stacks up to any quarterback in NFL history, has one of the most underrated arms ever, is one of the most accurate passers ever, has multiple excellent postseasons that ended in a Super Bowl, and has a plethora of iconic moments. He played egoless football, an uncanny ability to find the open man and take what the defense gave. Almost a supercomputer playing quarterback, and was a chameleon to whatever offensive system he played in. But most of all, and what truly made Brady the GOAT, was simply this. He was inevitable when the game was on the line. It seemed that whenever he had to make a play to come back in the fourth quarter and win the game, you felt he was going to, and then he did. You were surprised at the rare occasions he didn't. Only Montana and Mahomes have shared even close to that aura of inevitability in clutch time as Brady has throughout NFL history, but neither have done it for nearly as long as Brady did. He came through in the clutch far more than any quarterback in NFL history. There's so many examples of this, from his first ever playoff game against the Raiders in 2001, to his first ever Super Bowl against the Rams in 2001, to Super Bowl 38 against Carolina, to Super Bowl 49 against Seattle, to the 2017 AFC Championship game against Jacksonville, to the 2018 AFC Championship game against Kansas City, to even one of his final playoff games in the 2021 divisional round against the Rams, even though Tampa Bay ended up losing that game. And of course, 28-3 in Super Bowl 51 is the best example. But there's countless more. As of February 2015, Brady had a more complete resume and stronger GOAT argument than any quarterback ever. And since then, he's had a Hall of Fame career. He's the GOAT, not just of quarterbacks, but of all NFL players. It's that simple. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to like and subscribe to this channel for more NFL content. Who do you think is the greatest quarterback of all time? What's your top 10 looking like? Leave it in the comment section below. And with all of that said, God bless.